Welcome to the raw and uncensored Ambitchious podcast. During our time here together, I will be instilling all of the strength, power, and determination you will need to use the very stones thrown at you to build your ultimate empire. We will redefine the word bitch from the derogatory to the acronym being in total control of herself. So let's adjust our crowns and prepare to live life ambitiously.
Yeah, here I am, the original HBIC, Katie motherfucking Boyd. And on today's episode of the Ambitchious podcast, we are going to keep this inner child healing party going. And we're going to be talking all about journaling through inner child work. And I'm going to tell you something right now. I've done all this work. So don't think I'm just telling you out there in Ambitchious land to do something that I haven't already done, because I have done this about a bagillion times, and I still continue to do this because healing happens in layers. You don't just miraculously wake up one day and you're like, I'm healed, yay! Like, that's not how it works. And I don't care how old or young you are, everyone here has parts of their childhood that were not so fresh that we can always do more healing of. Okay. So I am going to go buck wild with the journal prompts. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you do heal through inner child healing journaling. So remember, as a child, you needed the support and guidance of your parents to fulfill your needs, as you were incapable of doing so on your own. Okay. Especially when you were really young, we couldn't feed ourselves. We couldn't clothe ourselves. We couldn't bathe ourselves. We couldn't pick ourselves up out of a crib, right? So that is like one area of your life. But even as like young children, it kind of went into a different hierarchy of needs as we got older, right? Like there was more emotional needs, spiritual needs, energetic needs, psychological and mental needs that we were kind of seeking and searching from our caregivers and the people who were most important to us in our lives, that gave us, the acknowledgement and the validation and the safety and the love that I don't care who you are, everyone deserves it and everyone requires it. So when those needs that I was just talking about weren't met for one reason or another, it may have led you, me, all of us, to feeling very vulnerable. And if this happened to you, that is very unfortunate and it should not have happened. But listen, it did. It happened, okay? Like, none of us are going to get off this big blue ball hurtling through space alive and unscathed. And so all of us, whether you had a very privileged life or you had a very unprivileged life, everyone has had some kind of childhood trauma. And the great news is that we all can heal from our wounding from childhood. And this can be done, and I've been talking about this the last couple of podcasts, about reparenting ourselves and giving ourselves the things that we actually lacked during our childhood. So learning skills such as how to self-soothe, really practice self-care. And remember, I talked about self-care in the last podcast, what it really means, but we're just going to say self-care here because that's what people are used to hearing, and address rather than suppress our difficult thoughts and emotions all help toward healing your inner child, which can all be accomplished through journaling. And through journaling, we can also heal our inner children in ways like journaling to cultivate self-love and practice positive self-talk, especially if you're the kind of person like I am, where I have a hard time saying nice things to myself. I have not a hard time saying not nice things to myself, but I have a difficult time saying nice things to myself. Taking note of activities you enjoyed during childhood, reflecting on both positive and negative childhood memories, writing out positive affirmations geared toward healing your inner child, writing a letter to your inner child, and using these inner child journal prompts that I'm going to talk to you about to help you heal. And healing your inner child through journaling is effective because you are taking the time needed to revisit past struggles and either work through them or reach a point of acceptance so that you can move forward. Okay. All right. So the other thing before I get to the journal prompts that I want to say is if you go back, God, like 100 podcasts ago, I actually took from my book, Ambitchious. If you haven't gotten it already, what the hell are you waiting for? I'll put the link in the show notes and I'll ship it to you with a beautiful handwritten letter inside. I do an entire chapter on healing our inner child. I do an entire chapter in that book on inner child healing meditation. So you can read it in the book. It's also on my app, my Ambitchious app, but it is also an entire podcast. So scroll back after you do these journal prompts, and I think that you should add your inner child healing meditation to your repertoire. But I think that starting with these journal prompts is really, really, really going to help you immensely. Okay. So I have about 100 of them here. I'm not going to give you all of them. These are a lot that I do with my my Ambitchious app clients. Okay, women from all over the world on my Ambitchious app. That will also be in the show notes if you'd like to get on a call with me to see if joining the app would be a good fit for you and what you can what the deliverables are, what you're going to experience, and what you're going to get from being part of our community, our bitchterhood community. Okay, so what questions should we ask our inner child? So I'm just going to go through one at a time. I'm going to number them, and then I'm going to ask you the question. And then what I would do is I would listen to this podcast with my journal or a notebook and a pen, and I would just listen to the words that I ask, pause the podcast, do the journal prompt, listen to the next one, pause the podcast, do the journal prompt. So this is definitely not like you can totally listen to this without doing it and just start to like make your memory jog a little bit. And then save it again, listen to it again after when you get home and you actually have quiet time to do this. Okay. So the first question of the journal prompt to heal your inner child is thinking about your inner child right now. What is she feeling currently? What is she feeling currently? Right now, if I had to answer this journal prompt, it would probably be, I feel lonely. I feel overwhelmed. I definitely feel a little bit nihilistic. Like, what is the point of all of this hard work and all the things that I'm doing? And now I think you guys know this about me, that I'm very much like an Albert Camus, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky type of person, where I am definitely like more of an absurdist. I'm more of a nihilist. And I know that people are like, wow, okay, that's dark. I don't think it is for me. I think it actually helps me because when I think about like, what's the point of these types of things? There's another half of me that's like, what do you mean? What's the point? You chose to come down here with your soul. You chose to do this work. This is your mission. This is your purpose. So just shut up and do it. And these are the conversations that I have with myself every day, guys. So don't think like I don't do this work. I do it on a daily basis. So the next thing is number 2. As a child, was there anything that you felt deprived of? For me, I definitely felt deprived of homeostasis and calmness and serenity and peace. And there was a lot of unsafe energy in my home growing up as well, more so when I was younger because of my father's addiction. And then my father, he worked so hard on getting clean, and my dad is sober and clean, and I'm just so proud of him. And it took a long time. And now that I think about my dad, I think about him battling his demons because I was listening to a podcast today with, it was actually really funny. It was good. It was the Theo Vaughn podcast. He's a comedian, and he had Gabor Mate on, who is a psychiatrist, and he actually specializes in inner child healing. And he was saying, all addiction, no matter what it is, could be alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, gambling, thrill seeking, whatever. All of it stems from trauma. And I was thinking of my dad's childhood. And this is why I really want my parents to come on the podcast, because I want you all to get to know them better, but I want to get to know my parents better. So one of the things I know for sure is that when my dad was about 14 years old, my uncle Steven died in a really horrific motorcycle accident when he was 19 years old. And from what I've gathered and what I remember just from hearing people talk as I was growing up is like my Nana Pearl, my grandmother, my dad's mom, pretty much had a nervous breakdown. And she kind of, abandon her family because she had two daughters and my dad, and then Stephen, who passed away. And she kind of like abandoned her family and went back to Nova Scotia, Canada, to be with her sisters and stuff, just to kind of get like some kind of a respite. And I'm sure that she had really bad grief and depression and all those things. But I think about like my dad being the baby of the family, like how did that shape his life? You lose your brother who's 19 years old, who's probably like who you admire the most in life, right? He's like the cool guy. My Uncle Stephen looked like Jim Morrison for the Doors. He was, it was back in the late 60s, early 70s, right? And he was kind of like a biker type of guy, and like really cool, like just like I don't know. I didn't meet him, right? Because I wasn't born until 81. But I hear stories sometimes, and I think about, wow, like how did that feel for my dad, who is the baby of this family, right? Like, no, who was taking care of him? Who is giving him his emotional needs? How is he grieving through his loss of his brother? And then my grandfather was kind of like a madman type of guy, where he like worked for Raytheon, and he was like part of a boys club and the golf and the drinking of the whiskey. And I don't know, like, was my dad neglected during this time? And is that where his alcoholism and drug addiction stemmed from self-soothing during that time? Like, these are the questions I really want to ask my dad. And I know people are like, well, you can ask him in a private way, but there's just something about recording it and having that for myself for the rest of my life. Like, it's more selfishly for me and not so much for my listeners. I don't know. That's just something I think about. And I know that I just went off on a tangent on this, but I think it's important too. The next one, number 3, did you ever feel like your peers had something you didn't? Absolutely. And probably wasn't true, right? Because when we're growing up, we think like everyone else has it better than we do. But I think that one thing that I will say is, if I could think about that, maybe my peers had more money, more freedom. Maybe they didn't have alcoholism and drug addiction and, mental illness or whatever in their home. So in a way, yeah, they did, right? Number 4, did you feel like you had more going on in your life than your peers? Yes. I always felt like there was always drama, like in my house. And that was a very stressful thing because there was never any peace. I don't remember there being a lot of like quiet times in my house or peaceful times in my house. I did gain a lot of peace growing up when I would go to visit my grandmother. But other than that, I don't remember as a young child there being like a lot of peace. And maybe there was, but I am just so kind of traumatized by all the bad things that happened. That's almost sometimes it's all I can remember, which is really sad, The next one is number 5. What is your inner child most afraid of? Oh God, that's such a good one. What is my inner child most afraid of? I would say that my inner child is most afraid of having no control and feeling powerless. That's my 2 things, which is probably why freedom is my number 1 core desired feeling. And when anyone tells me what to do, or I'm not in a position of control, even if it's like driving somewhere, like I always have to be the driver, and it pisses Matt off. And I think now, after, being together for 13 years, he's like, whatever, girl, just drive, But for me, it's definitely power and control. And I'm sure for you guys out there in Ambitchious Land that are doing this work, and kudos to you if you are, maybe yours is different. And I hope that you guys appreciate my vulnerability, because this is not easy for me to talk about out loud either. The next question is, in what way does your inner child need support right now? If I could say exactly, I would like to give up a little bit of control and have other people make decisions for me. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's almost like immersion therapy, where it's like, because sometimes, like, and I'll just give you an example. Like, Matt knows I'm a control freak, and Matt also trusts me in my intuition. So he'll say to me, let's just say something simple. Hey, what do you want to eat tonight, babe? Or I'll say to him, what do you want to eat tonight? And he'll say, oh, I don't care. You can pick. Because I think he does that because he's like, the bitch ain't going to be happy with anything I choose. So like, I am going to just let her choose. But every so often I have this hankering for like Matt just to like make the decisions for me. Like choose the restaurant, surprise me, do the research to make the thing happen. Like even like we're planning a really big vacation right now, and I've just been like watching YouTube videos and like talking to all my friends who have been to this place and asking all these questions and like creating the perfect agenda and everywhere where we're going to eat and where we're going to go and where we're going to stay. And it's like, and Matt's like, well, that's what you're so good at, so I let you do it. But there's just like always this little desire, this little hankering for him to step in and kind of like be the parental role for me sometimes and make the decision for me. And I'll probably take that back if he ever does do it. But right now, that's how I feel. And journaling can change, right? Like tomorrow, you could journal the same thing and feel totally different. So this is not dogma. This is not like something that you have to stick to. Okay. Number 7, what was a quality or personality trait you had during childhood that you wish you still had? Oh my God. I don't know. That's a hard question because I feel like all the personality traits I had when I was younger are things that I've worked so hard to get rid of. So I'll have to get back to you on that one. But maybe this is an easier question for you to answer. Next one, number 8. In what ways are your mindset and thought processes impacted today by what you experienced as a child? For me, it's that no one's coming to save you. You got to save yourself. Never have victim mentality. Always be grateful. Always be determined. Always be tenacious. And then there's like the darker parts of me that are always in like a fear spiral of not enoughness and lack mindset and always trying to scratch and claw and strive for the next thing just so I can keep telling myself that I'm worthy and that I'm enough and like, see, I still got it. And that to me right now at this juncture or junction or whatever the fuck the word is of my life is just like not the vibe. It's actually exhausting. The next one, number 9, is what happened in your childhood that you didn't realize would have an impact on you at the time, but currently affects you? Oh my God, this is hard. This is really hard. What happened in your childhood that you didn't realize that you would have an impact on you at the time, but currently affects you? I would have to say off the top of my head, because it's always the first thing that comes up first, is I think when my parents lost their business and not having that income and feeling like poor at the time, or like we didn't have affluence and abundance. And now I'm always like chasing to always be financially secure. And that is in itself such a trap and it's such a grind. And I think a lot of that, like Matt will say to me, Katie, you don't have to do this. We are comfortable beyond. And I'm like, I know, but it's always like that fear of like, we could just lose it all tomorrow. And he's like, but that's not, Katie, no. He's like, we have life insurance policies that are millions of dollars, right? We have all of the, we have money market accounts. We have S&P 500s, 401ks, like all these different things that we have put our monies into to keep it safe, right? We have savings accounts and this thing and we make a lot of money every month. And there's always this fear of like, what if tomorrow the well runs dry? Also another thing that just came up for me too is another reason why everything in my house has to be pristine and has to work is I remember like just being a little kid and there was like always something broken in my house. Like there was always a leaky pipe. There was always a broken washing machine. There was always like something was always like broken and then like rigged to work. And so now like anytime things in my house like break, I have to have it fixed like right away. I have to get a new one right away. I don't like the feeling of like all that like broken shit around me. And this is more like surface level conversation, but it does impact me as an adult. The next one is number 10. How do you feel about the way your parents raised you? For a long time, I was angry at them. I really was mad at them. Like I hated my parents. And I'm going to be just truly honest. When I was much younger, I was just like, these motherfuckers. And the more work that I've done on myself, I realized like, wow, like no one taught them shit. They didn't have awakened spiritual parents. The parents were just like in a grind. definitely in hypnotic rhythm, living very three-dimensionally, living very entrenched in the matrix. And for some reason, my parents never sought out like trying to learn these things. They were just trying to survive. And so one of the things that would make me angry when I was younger is like I just felt like they didn't try hard enough and they didn't think about me and they didn't put me first. But the truth of the matter was is like they didn't have those tools. So it's like asking a goldfish to climb a tree like a cheetah. They couldn't do it. And the more that I come to that conclusion, the happier I am with my relationship with my parents. So just saying. Okay. The next journal prompt here is, what was the most helpful? This is number 11. What was the most helpful thing your parents did while raising you? What was the most helpful thing that your parents did while raising you? I will say that my parents really did support my dreams and my goals. Now, looking back and doing a lot of work, I wonder how many of my dreams and goals were actually my own and not placed upon me by longings or desires of my own parents who didn't fulfill certain needs. But I will say that when I did have something that was important, they did support it. Now, I do realize that there was definitely, and this is another thing that plagues me to this day, is every time I had something important, one of my parents would definitely fuck it up. I love you, Mom and Dad. But like, I remember we went on a Washington, D.C. trip once, and my mom got like a call in the hotel room that like my dad had gotten into a car accident and he left my sister at the YMCA. And then my poor mother was like so panicked. And, I don't remember exactly how it all went down. That's obviously why I want to have my parents on the podcast. I would love to ask them these questions. Or I would go away to a pageant weekend and I'd come home and like my mom had like put her hand through a cabinet because she was like fighting with my dad and she was like all bandaged up. Like there was always this fear of like, when there's something important, someone's going to pull some shit. And so now, even to this day, I notice that when I have important events or important things in my life, there's always this like low hum of underlying fear of something bad is going to happen. And sometimes I think that I'm so powerful that I actually make the bad thing happen because my brain just goes into that hypnotic rhythm loop of like, when you have something important, someone gets sick, someone gets into a fight, someone gets drunk, someone, gets arrested, someone drives their car into a tree, like someone, loses whatever, And I don't know if this is something that you guys have experienced, but this is definitely me just being totally honest and vulnerable with you guys. And I hope that this prompts you to do the same with your own life. Okay. The next one was number 12. What was the most harmful thing your parents did while raising you? I would have to say it was definitely the addiction. And then for my mom, and this is again why I wouldn't want to ask her questions, I think my mom definitely had faulty coping mechanisms to deal with my dad's addiction. So my mom would like go and shop, like, and she'd spend like tons of money and just shop and shop and shop, probably money, that we didn't have. Right. My mom and dad would fight. This is a big thing too for me. My mom and dad would fight and then they would like make up, so they would like beat the shit out of each other and like scream at each other and like do all this crazy shit. And remember, my parents were 24 years old when they had me. So think of who you were when you were 24. I know that I have been married and had kids and been running a household. I just was not mature enough. And I don't think that they were either, but it was definitely a different time, right? It's like you just graduate high school and you maybe go to college. And if you don't go to college, you get married, have kids. It's like the whole thing, right? But I would definitely say that one of the most harmful things that my parents did while raising me, and this is my own personal opinion, is my sister may have a totally different outlook. But for me, it was definitely like they would do all this terrible shit to each other, and then they would just like make up. And so in my mind, I said, oh, this is what love is. Like, love is like you beat the shit out of each other, you call each other every name in the book, you just like break dishes and fuck up the house and fly off the handle and drive drunk and do all this shit. And then like you just the next day, everything just goes back to normal. And so many of my relationships growing up were like that. And I definitely know for a fact that I chose men and even friendships that were like that. Like you would have these like knockdown, drag out, blowout fights. And then the next day it would be like, hey, are we cool? And it's like, yeah, we're cool. Cause that's how like I was raised. I'll never forget. I was dating this guy for about 4 or 5 years. And I just like thought he was the love of my life. You know, I was young, about in my early 20s. And I remember he beat the absolute shit out of me one day. I don't even remember what we were fighting about, but he beat the absolute shit out of me one day. And I just remember like sitting on our back porch with a cup of tea, just like, what the fuck am I doing? What are you doing, Katie? Like, you are better than this. Like, you're going to end up dead. Like, I remember that having that conversation with myself. And he had gone out for a motorcycle ride. And a couple hours later, he came back and I was all fucked up. You know, like the tears on my face were just all dried up. I was probably, my hair was all fucked up. I was bruised and all just an emotional wreck, physical wreck too. And he brought me this bouquet of flowers. And I was like, oh, thank you so much, you know, whatever. And he's like, you know, didn't say he was sorry, nothing, just gave me the flowers and just went in the other room. And I remember reading, like, you know, the little card that comes with like the little flowers that you buy at like the little grocery stores or whatever. And like, you can like have a card that says like, I'm sorry or congratulations or whatever. And I don't think he looked inside of the flowers or an angel put this note in the flowers. But it wasn't signed. So he didn't even know it was in there, but it said, get well soon on it. And I was like, yeah, I will get well soon, motherfucker. And shortly after that, I left him. And that was a whole catastrophic series of events too, like what he put me and my family through afterwards. And I had to get a restraining order against him. And it was horrible, 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 horrible. But I stayed way longer than I should have with that person because I was so used to seeing that kind of shit in my own home that I was just like, oh, this is just what people do when they love each other. They just beat the shit out of each other and then they just get each other a bouquet of flowers or a card and then everybody moves on or a gift or whatever, you know? So I think that was one of the most harmful things that my parents did while raising me is modeling that to me. Number 13. If you had to choose one word to describe your childhood, what would it be? I would say chaotic. Chaotic. Chaotic would be my number one word. Just one word. I could choose lots of others, but I'd say chaotic. Number 14. Was your childhood mostly stable or unstable, and how so? Again, I think because I had so much trauma in my life growing up, I don't remember a lot of good things. And I know that there were a lot of good things. And sometimes my mother's like, oh, you know, you act like your childhood was all bad. And I'm like, I don't act like that. I just don't remember. Because I think those parts of my brain that control those thoughts and those feelings kind of got shut off because I had to almost disassociate a lot as a child growing up. The next one is number 15. Which parts of your personality as a child were you told to hide, and how does that make you feel now? Well, I talked a little bit about a couple podcasts ago about like not having a voice, you know, like don't tell anyone what goes on in this house, protect the family at all costs. The way you feel doesn't matter. Your pain doesn't matter. Your voice doesn't matter. You're really insignificant. And the only way that you can be significant, the only way that you can receive love and validation is when you're achieving. And then what happened to me is I got that bug of like, oh, if I can be funny or if I can entertain these people, I'm important and I can help my family heal and I can bring them together. And this is the shit you think about when you're a little kid, which is so untrue. But that's how your brain works as a small child. So I would say, like, you know, when people say like, oh, I have a high pain threshold, and I used to wear that with a badge of honor. And now that I'm older, it's not such a fresh thing. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not such a fresh thing. I actually am embarrassed when I say that now, because the reason why people have high pain thresholds is because they've had to bury their pain their whole entire life and they've had to just suck it up. And so if you are one of those people out there in Ambitchious land that's like, oh, I have a high pain threshold, stop saying that and start thinking about why you have the high pain threshold in the first place. Number 16, what is the one thing you wish you could change about your childhood? I actually wouldn't change anything about my childhood. I would want to change my parents' childhoods, because obviously they became how they are because of the trauma that they went through in their childhood. And so if I could do anything, I wish I had a magic wand where I could go back and I could make their childhoods more healing. I think about like my mom was like this change of life baby where my grandfather and my grandmother both lost their first husband and wife to sickness, and they both had children from their first marriages. And then my grandparents met each other and then had my mom. I think my grandmother was like 42 years old, which back then in the 50s was like really old to have babies. And so all of my mom's brothers and sisters were so mean to her and so jealous of her, and they would do horrible shit to my mother. Like I remember as a little girl, my uncle Edmund would come over my house and just beat the piss out of my mother. And he would take her head and smash her head off of the bricks of our fireplace. And then my aunt Brenda, who's passed away now, would come over my mother's house when my grandmother was passing away. And my poor mother, took care of my grandmother in her last days. And then I remember my Aunt Brenda coming over and my mom was like, can you please watch mom for a little bit? Like, I just have to go to the grocery store. And my aunt would be like, fuck you, I'm going on a date. And my mom, I remember one time specifically, my mom was like cutting peppers for like a tomato sauce, like a pasta sauce. And she had just cut like a pepper in half. And my aunt looked like Zsa Zsa Gabor. Like she had full hair, full makeup, getting ready to go get her freak on. And my mom took the pepper and just smashed the fucking pepper all over her hair, and there was like 1,000 seeds in her head, and her hair was all fucked up because like the pepper juice. And my mom was like, now you're not going anywhere. And just like shit like that, like seeing that shit growing up, I'm like, where did that come from? My mom was in a burn unit. My uncle, when my mom was little, was chasing her around my house, my grandmother's house, and my grandmother had a hot boiling pot of water on the stove, and my uncle like tipped it over onto my mother's head. And like my mom still, if you look in her hair, has like hair that doesn't grow in certain spots because it burned her head. Like you're telling me that wasn't a fucking trauma? And think about it, when my mother was going through this trauma as a child, I was in my mother's body already. So whatever my mom was feeling was going into me epigenetically and ancestrally and energetically. And so there's so many things about my life now where I have these like crazy fears and weird shit. And I'm like, where does this come from? And then I'm like, oh my God, maybe it's like was passed down from me ancestrally. And remember I said I say this all the time on so many of my podcasts, like when my mother was in my grandmother's belly, I was with both of them. So whatever my poor grandmother went through in her life, I had that passed to me. And my grandmother had a not so easy life and lost her husband and had these children. And that was like, there was no like help for women like my grandmother back then in the 50s and the 40s, So I think about these things all the time, and there's just so many layers to this inner child healing work. There's so many layers. Please, guys, give yourself the time to do these journal prompts. This is such a service to you. It's going to change your life if you really do it. The next one is number 17. What is your worst memory from school? Oh my God, there's so many. Like what point in time? Well, I was definitely always like acting out in class. So I was always trying to entertain people and be the funny one and like, all that. So I was always in trouble. I always had to have my desk moved. And I always was put in the corner. I went to Catholic school and they used to like literally put you in the corner to punish you in front of the whole class. Like, can you fucking believe this shit? They would hit you with rulers, all kinds of stuff. And that really even happened in my day. What makes me sad and upset and like I think about it sometimes is like, okay, I was acting out like that. Why did no teacher think like, wow, maybe something's going on at home? Just keep punishing this kid. Or I remember like as a young adult, like maybe not so childhood, but as a young adult, like just hating the schooling part of school and just wanting to get out of my house for like some kind of just friendship and talking, and like that wasn't like chaos all the time, And I just was not good at school. I just was a bad student. And it wasn't because I wasn't smart, because I'm extremely intelligent. I just hated it. And I just felt so fucked up all the time because of all the things that were going on at home in my house. And I remember like a teacher, Miss George, she was a math teacher. And I remember like trying to solve an equation in algebra. I was maybe like a sophomore, maybe a freshman, sophomore. And she said in front of the whole class, "Well, thank God you're pretty because you sure are stupid." Or I had a lot of teachers that went to school with my parents growing up who hated my parents, and they would take their shit out on me. Like that happened a lot in school too. So those are kind of some of the harder memories, like the worst memories from school. Number 18, what's your best memory from school? Oh my God, definitely. I would say anything that was competitive that I could win, like spelling bees or art contests or singing things or theater. Anything where I could prove my worthiness and my enoughness was like probably my favorite memories, which is probably so fucked up just saying this, but I'm just trying to be super vulnerable with you guys and just spit truth. And I know it's not easy to hear. You're probably like, damn, this bitch needs a fucking shrink. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Number 19, we're going to stop at 20. So number 19, let out all of your thoughts surrounding school during childhood. Do you think your teachers, peers, or the school system harmed you? Oh my God, absolutely. I used to get jumped in school. I used to get stolen from. The teachers were so mean. I think about how I teach my clients, and I feel like I just give people so much love, and I motivate them, and I just give them all these tools. And I just feel like there was not a lot of teachers growing up that did that. Yeah, there was a handful of teachers that I can remember off the top of my head that were really amazing teachers, and thank God for them. But I would say mostly no. I think that mostly there was a lot of mean kids in school. I was probably mean to people too because I was acting out because of all the shit that I was going through at home. So yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to get into this one too much because I could go on a tangent, but just free writing all your thoughts during school, childhood. And do you think that your teachers, peers, or the school system harmed you? Yeah, I do. And last but not least, and this is for this podcast, we're going to keep going on next week's podcast. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much, but I think this is a good place to stop. Is number 20, did your childhood have mixed periods where things were sometimes good and sometimes things were bad? Absolutely. I mean, I have some really fond memories of vacations on Martha's Vineyard with my family in, Florida, and visiting my grandmother, and baking and cooking, and, holidays and things like that. Playing cards with my cousins who would come down from Canada, being with my aunts and uncles, being with my sister, doing fun shit with her. I had a lot of really nice friends growing up, but there's definitely like a lot of parts of my childhood that I don't want to remember because they were horrible, like everyone's life, even my mother and father can sit here and say the same for their own childhood, right? So I don't want you to think I'm attacking my caregivers and I'm attacking my parents. I love my mother and father, and I think that they should do. And your parents out there in Ambitchious Land, ask them to do this work with you. Like, how healing, if you have the chance to do it, how healing would this be to do this with your family? I don't know. I'm just saying. So if you loved this podcast and you think it helped you, I'm sure it will help so many other people. Please share this out in Ambitchious Land. Extra points if you tag me. I'd love to see what you're writing and send you a beautiful gift. I would also love for you to give us a 5-star and a written review wherever you listen to this podcast. And yeah, do this work. It's so important, guys. It's changed my life and it's continuing to change my life. And like I always say, in the meantime, don't forget to stay ambitious, and I will see you next Tuesday for more inner child healing work.